Hello, class. I am Professor Franklin, and today's lesson is about a rule that has been taught to millions of people as financial wisdom, repeated in every personal finance book published in the last 2 decades, endorsed by banks, by apps, by well-meaning financial advisors, and that, for a specific and identifiable reason, is quietly making a significant portion of the people who follow it poorer over time. The rule is the 50-30-20 budget. 50% of your income to needs, 30% to wants, 20% to savings and debt repayment. It sounds reasonable. It sounds balanced. It sounds like the kind of framework that a responsible adult should be able to follow, and, if they follow it faithfully, arrive at financial security somewhere on the other side. Here's what almost no one tells you about it. The 50-30-20 rule was designed in the early 2000s for a median American household income that has not kept pace with the cost of living in any major metropolitan area in this country for the past 15 years. The cost of housing alone, the single largest component of the needs category, has increased at a rate that the original framework simply did not account for. And when the framework's largest category is structurally broken, following the rule faithfully does not produce financial security. It produces the precise illusion of financial management while the actual wealth gap quietly widens. That is what we're going to examine today, not whether the rule is morally right or wrong, whether it is structurally sound, and for whom, and under what conditions, and what to do instead. To understand why the 50-30-20 rule fails the people who need it most, you have to understand the conditions under which it was designed. The framework was popularized by Senator Elizabeth Warren and her daughter Amelia Warren Tyagi in their 2005 book, All Your Worth. The underlying research was drawn from bankruptcy data and household financial surveys from the late 1990s and early 2000s. At that moment, in American economic history, a median household income could support a mortgage on a median-priced home at a payment that consumed somewhere between 25 and 30% of gross income. Housing was expensive, but it was proportionate. The 50% needs category was built around that proportionality. If housing consumed roughly 25 to 30% of income, there was room inside 50% for utilities, transportation, groceries, so insurance, and the other genuine non-negotiables of a functional life. The math worked. The categories fit. Here is what has happened since then. In 2005, the median home price in the United States was approximately $230,000. By 2024, that number had risen to over $420,000, an increase of more than 80%. Median household income over the same period rose by approximately 40% in nominal terms and considerably less than that in real inflation-adjusted terms. The gap between those two rates of increase, home prices rising at roughly double the rate of income, is not a temporary anomaly. It is a structural shift that has permanently altered the proportions the 50-30-20 framework was built on. In many major cities, New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Boston, Seattle, Miami, and increasingly mid-tier cities that absorbed remote work migration, the housing cost for a median earner now consumes not 25 to 30% of income, but 40 to 50%, sometimes more, which means that if you are a median earner in any of those cities and you are following the 50-30-20 rule faithfully, putting 50% toward needs, you have already spent your entire needs budget on housing alone before you have bought a single grocery, paid a single utility bill, or put a single tank of gas in your car. The framework has no room for you. And yet, it continues to be taught as universal guidance. This is not a budgeting problem. This is a framework problem. And the distinction matters, because if you believe it is a budgeting problem, you will spend your energy trying to optimize within a broken container. If you understand it is a framework problem, you will do something more useful. You will build a better framework. There are 3 specific mechanisms by which faithful adherence to the 50-30-20 rule, in the economic conditions that exist right now, not the ones that existed in 2005, produces worse financial outcomes than a more structurally honest approach. The first mechanism is the wants category acting as a pressure valve for the needs overflow. When housing and transportation costs consume more than 50% of income, which, as we've established, they do for an enormous portion of the population following this rule, the natural human response is to quietly reclassify. Groceries become slightly more expensive because you're too exhausted from managing housing stress to meal plan. Transportation costs creep up because you took the job that paid slightly more but is 40 minutes farther from home. The internet connection gets upgraded because you're working from home and it's a need now, isn't it? These are not acts of financial irresponsibility. They are rational adaptations to a framework that doesn't fit. But when the needs overflow, silently absorbs the wants budget. The 20% savings category is the one that actually gets cut. Not in one dramatic decision, in 100 small ones, each of which feels justified in the moment. The rule that was supposed to protect your savings rate becomes the structure that makes it invisible when it disappears. The second mechanism is the savings category being chronically under-targeted for wealth building. 20% sounds substantial. It is, in fact, the most frequently cited savings rate in popular financial media. It's repeated so often that it has acquired the weight of mathematical authority. Here is the institutional reality. A 20% savings rate, applied to a median income, invested from age 30, produces a retirement portfolio that supports approximately 60 to 65% of pre-retirement income under standard withdrawal rate assumptions. That sounds adequate until you account for 2 variables the 50-30-20 rule does not address. First, healthcare costs in retirement, which are not covered by that replacement income at any level that provides genuine security. Second, longevity. Women, statistically, live approximately 6 years longer than men on average. 6 years of additional retirement is not a small adjustment. It is a 20% extension of the financial demand on a portfolio that was sized for a shorter runway. A 20% savings rate is not wrong. It is a floor, not a ceiling, and it has been marketed as a destination. The third mechanism is the most subtle, and in some ways, the most damaging. The rule creates the psychological experience of financial management without necessarily producing the financial reality of it. When you have a framework, even a broken one, that you are following, you feel in control. The categories exist. The percentages are named. You are doing the thing. This feeling of compliance is not nothing. It provides genuine psychological relief, which is why people adopt frameworks in the first place. But when the framework is structurally mismatched to your actual economic reality, the feeling of control and the reality of control are not the same thing. And the gap between them, the distance between feeling managed and being managed, is where wealth silently erodes. The most financially sophisticated investors I am aware of, individuals, institutions, endowments, do not use fixed percentage rules applied uniformly across all conditions. They use dynamic allocation frameworks that respond to actual costs, actual income levels, actual market conditions, and actual life circumstances. They treat their financial plan as a living document, not a fixed formula. The 50-30-20 rule, for all its accessibility, is a fixed formula. And fixed formulas applied to dynamic realities produce drift. Here is where I want to give you something genuinely useful. Not just the diagnosis of what is broken, but the structural alternative. Institutional investors, the endowments, the pension funds, the family offices we've discussed before in this classroom, do not begin their financial planning with percentage categories. They begin with what is called a liability-driven framework. The question is not, what percentage of income should go to each category? The question is, what are my actual, specific financial obligations and goals? What do they cost, and what allocation of resources is required to meet them? That inversion, starting from obligations rather than from percentages, produces a fundamentally different financial plan. And it is available to any individual investor willing to think about their finances the way institutions do. Here is how to apply it practically. Start with your genuine fixed obligations, not the 50% category. Your actual, specific, named monthly obligations that would continue whether you wanted them to or not. Housing, utilities, insurance, minimum debt payments, transportation costs, required for employment. Add them up. That is your real fixed cost floor. Express it as a percentage of your actual after-tax income. Whatever that number is, 38%, 52%, 61%, that is your real starting point, not 50%. Whatever your reality is. Now, and this is the step the 50-30-20 rule skips entirely. Set your investment contribution first, before you allocate anything else. Not as the residual category, as the first commitment. Decide, from a calm and forward-looking position, what monthly investment contribution is required to reach your specific wealth target at your specific timeline. Calculate that number. Commit to it automatically. Then work backward to determine what is available for discretionary spending. This is the reversal that changes everything. The 50-30-20 rule allocates savings last. Whatever is left after needs and wants have been funded. The institutional approach funds savings first and treats discretionary spending as the residual. That single structural inversion, sustained across a decade, produces a meaningfully different portfolio. The wants category, the 30%, is the most honest part of the original framework, and also the most misunderstood. The intention was never to give you permission to spend 30% of your income on non-essentials. The intention was to acknowledge that human beings are not purely rational economic actors, and that a financial plan that allows no space for enjoyment, for experience, for the texture of a life being lived rather than merely survived, is a plan that will not be followed. 30% was a realistic acknowledgement of human nature, not an endorsement of any particular level of discretionary spending. In an institutional framework, this category is better understood as a variable buffer, the space between your fixed obligations and your committed investment contribution. What remains after those two commitments are funded is available for discretionary use. Sometimes that is 20%. Sometimes it is 15%. Sometimes, in a particularly difficult financial season, it is less. The important thing is that it is calculated from reality, not assigned from a formula. There is a dimension of the 50-30-20 conversation that almost never appears in mainstream financial media, and I think it is the most important one. The rule performs differently at different income levels, not marginally differently, structurally differently. And the direction of that difference is precisely backwards from what most people assume. At high income levels, let us say, household income above $150,000 annually, in a moderate cost of living area. The 50-30-20 rule is, if anything, too conservative on savings. Fixed costs at that income level rarely consume 50%. A household earning $180,000 after tax that is spending $90,000 on needs has a housing and transportation situation that is generous by any standard. The savings rate could and arguably should be substantially higher than 20%. And the wants category is absorbing more than it needs to simply because the formula allocates it there. At median income levels, and particularly at median income levels in high cost of living areas, the rule is, as we've established, structurally unsound. The fixed cost reality exceeds the 50% allocation. The savings category gets compressed to compensate, and the wants category provides psychological cover for a plan that is quietly failing. At lower income levels, the rule is not merely unhelpful, it is actively misleading. A household earning $40,000 annually cannot meaningfully separate needs from wants in the way the framework assumes, because at that income level, the margin between adequate and inadequate is too thin for the categories to function as designed. Telling someone earning $40,000 to allocate 30% to wants is not financial guidance. It is arithmetic that doesn't correspond to any livable reality. The rule was built for a specific income band, in a specific economic moment, in a specific cost of living environment. Applying it universally, across all income levels, across all geographies, across 2 decades of structural economic change, is not financial wisdom. It is the mass distribution of a tool calibrated for conditions that no longer broadly exist. What this means practically is that you should evaluate the 50-30-20 rule the same way you would evaluate any tool. Is it calibrated for my specific conditions? And if the answer is no, which, for a significant portion of the people in this classroom, it is, then the responsible move is not to try harder to fit your life into the framework. It is to build a framework that fits your life. Let me give you the structure, concretely, so that when you leave this classroom today, you have something to work with. Step 1. Calculate your real fixed cost percentage. Add every genuine, non-negotiable monthly obligation. Divide by after-tax monthly income. Write that number down. That is your actual floor. The percentage of your income that is already committed before any discretionary decision is made. If it is above 50%, you now know that the 50-30-20 rule is not your framework. You are not failing the rule. The rule is failing you. Step 2. Define your wealth target and your timeline, not abstractly, specifically. How much do you need at retirement, or at financial independence, which may come earlier, to sustain your current lifestyle, accounting for healthcare, accounting for longevity, accounting for inflation? There are straightforward calculators for this. The output is a monthly investment contribution required to reach that number. That number becomes your second fixed commitment, as non-negotiable as rent. Step 3. Subtract steps 1 and 2 from 100%. Whatever remains is your actual discretionary budget. Not 30%, not 20%. Whatever your reality produces after your genuine fixed costs and your committed investment contribution are funded. That number is honest. Work with it honestly. Step 4. Within your discretionary budget, make explicit choices. Not categories with assigned percentages. Explicit choices about what you value and what you are willing to trade. This is the step the 50-30-20 rule replaces with percentages, and it is the step that actually produces financial alignment between what you say you value and where your money goes. This is harder than following a formula. It requires you to actually make decisions rather than apply rules. but it is the only approach that is calibrated to your specific income, your specific costs, and your specific wealth-building timeline. And it is the approach that produces results that compound, rather than compliance that feels right but drifts. Let me bring this to a close. The 50-30-20 rule is not a scam. It is not malicious. It was built with genuine intention to make financial planning accessible, to provide a simple structure for people who had no structure at all, to democratize a basic budgeting framework that had previously existed only in more complicated forms. But accessible is not the same as accurate. And a framework that is simple but miscalibrated for your actual economic conditions will not produce the outcomes it promises, no matter how faithfully you follow it. The institutional insight, the one that wealth managers and endowments and sophisticated individual investors have always operated from, is that financial frameworks are tools, not truths. They are starting points, not destinations. And the most important financial skill you can develop is not the ability to follow a framework perfectly, but the ability to evaluate whether the framework you are using is actually calibrated for your life. The 50-30-20 rule, applied in a high-cost city on a median income, in an era of housing costs that have structurally outpaced wages, is not calibrated for your life. It is calibrated for a version of the economy that existed 20 years ago. You deserve a framework built on your actual numbers, your actual fixed costs, your actual wealth target, your actual timeline. Here is the question I want to leave in this classroom today. If you replaced every fixed percentage in your current financial plan with numbers derived from your actual economic reality, your real fixed cost floor, your real required investment contribution, your real discretionary space, how different would that plan look from the one you're currently following? And what would it mean for where you're headed if those two numbers are not the same? Class, you have the framework now. Build something real with it.